Hi everybody, we're going to look at a new topic today which is called Earth Chemistry. In this topic we are going to be looking at a variety of different things, including how drinking water is produced, some really exciting stuff about sewage treatment, which is actually quite interesting, and a variety of bits and pieces about the Earth in general. But we're going to be starting off with the atmosphere. So just make sure that you've got that written in your book, that it's a new topic, and that we have today's date and title for the atmosphere. You can leave a space for a title page if you like. And then what I'd like you to do is, while you're sorting out the title and things and making sure you've got your exercise book and a quiet space to work, pause the video and have a think about what you know about the atmosphere. What is it? What's it there for? Anything you know about it. So what you have to be aware of is that the atmosphere is a really thin layer of gas or gases around the Earth. Now, quite a few planets do have an atmosphere. We're only really interested in the Earth for this, although sometimes in exam questions they do like you to compare to other planets, and they might give you composition information. That means how much of each gas there is. What we're going to be looking at today is the atmosphere in general, the atmosphere today, and then how the atmosphere has changed from when it formed to what it is now. Later in the topic we are also going to be looking at things like the greenhouse effect, which is a useful warming effect that the atmosphere has on the Earth, and then global warming and climate change, which are the possibilities of the greenhouse effect being out of control. So I've got here this diagram of the Earth with the layers of the atmosphere. Now this is not to scale. That's very important to be aware of. The Earth is about 6,400 kilometers from the center to the outside, and the atmosphere itself is about 500, it's 300 miles, about 500 kilometers high. So you can see that this is very much not to scale, and in actual fact the atmosphere would be a very thin layer around the edge. But this is just expanded to show you what's going on. Now, the majority of the gas in the atmosphere is actually only in the first 10 or so kilometers, and the majority of the atmosphere is very, very thin gases, and it gets thinner as you get to the edge. So just be aware of that, is that we are mostly going to be dealing with the mixture of gases that are very close to the Earth at the Earth's surface. So to have a think about the composition, the makeup of the Earth's atmosphere at the surface today, and that means the gases that we're breathing in every time you take a lungful of breath. As I said, composition is the makeup, the contents, the ingredients, if we were to break it down into its constituent bits. Now we can look at the makeup using a tea light. Now if we were in the lab, I'd be able to show you this as a demo. I do have a video of it, so this is in my classroom. You can imagine you're sitting in my room watching a demonstration. And what I've got is a tea light on this little shelf. This is called a beehive shelf. It looks like an old-fashioned beehive. It's just a piece of equipment that enables us to hold things up in water. And what we're going to do is I'm going to put a measuring cylinder over the top of that, and you might be able to see that there's water in this trough, and that there's water just at the edge of just around the bottom of that candle. So I'm going to put a measuring cylinder over the top, and you're just going to watch what happens. So you might have been able to hear some classroom noises as well. I missed that, don't know about you. So what we can see here is that the candle has risen up in that tube. Now it's not very easy to see, but underneath the candle is actually water. And I've got a diagram here that I've made to make this a bit clearer. So here's the trough, and you can draw this into your notes if you like. So we have a trough, and that is filled with water. This is called the beehive shelf. And then we have a tea light, which I think you can see with a flame. And what I'm going to do, as I said, is place the measuring cylinder over the top and just watch what happens. So just to show you again, okay, if I can. I'm not sure I can't show you again, but what happened there is that the candle went out, and as it went out, water was sucked in to that measuring cylinder, rose up and carried that tea light up. Now what we need to do is to think why that happened. Why has the water been sucked into that measuring cylinder to cause the tea light to go up in the air? So just have a think for a second. So what was happening there is that the candle burns using oxygen, O2 gas. Okay, so I've written it there as its chemical formula, O2 gaseous. Okay, so that's oxygen. And the candle went out, or the flame went out, when all of the oxygen was used up. And that's why we've got this increase of water in this measuring cylinder. That's taken the place of where the oxygen was. So volume that was O2. Now because the candle used the oxygen, the water gets sucked in to replace the oxygen that's been used. And this helps us see approximately how much of air is oxygen. And if you were to measure it, it's about a fifth of that measuring cylinder. Not very accurate on my diagram, but it is approximately, that's what this little wiggle means, approximately 20% of the air is oxygen. So every time you breathe in, only a fifth of your lungful is actually oxygen. So what's the rest? Well, here is a little pie chart showing the composition of the atmosphere today. And you need to know this. This is really important. You'll be expected to learn these numbers. And so 78% of air, or the atmosphere near the surface of the Earth, is nitrogen, N2. So every time you breathe in, over 3/4 of that lungful of air is actually nitrogen, not oxygen. And the body doesn't use that nitrogen, so you just breathe it back out again. Now we said about 20%, but to be more precise, it's 21% of air, the atmosphere at the Earth's surface, is oxygen gas. And that leaves us with 1% being other gases. And you can see from the pie chart that we've got carbon dioxide, argon, which is a noble gas, water vapour, and other gases as well. Now carbon dioxide, which is something that we get quite worried about, is approximately, well, between 0.03 and 0.05%, depending on where you are. That's how much CO2 there is in the atmosphere. Now we're going to look in later lessons at why carbon dioxide is a problem, but maybe you can see, for the fact that there's so little in the atmosphere, adding any does change it quite a lot, so it can cause problems. Make sure you've got that written down in your notes, that's really important. So next there is a worksheet that I'd like you to have a look at. This is a card sort, so you can cut and stick if you like, or you can just number the boxes. It is a worksheet with sort of cards on it, if you like, so the sentence on the left belongs to the picture on the right. So bacteria appeared does go with the little blue squiggles there. That's a picture of some bacteria just there. So you can do it as a cut and stick if you like. You can just number it, and if you aren't able to print, then what you could do is you could number and you could note down sort of briefly what each box has. So you could just say molten ball for this one. You can say oxygen levels rose, algae evolved for this one. So pull out the important parts. Now I'd like you to have a read through the worksheet and see if you can just to begin with, without looking anything else up, work out what order they might go in to make it in a sensible order.
To help you understand about this a little bit more, I've got a little bit of a clip from a BBC programme about the atmosphere.
We've seen the power of the atmosphere to shape the planet and create the weather. But it's the relationship between the atmosphere and life that has made our planet unique in the solar system. To understand how this vital relationship evolved, you have to go back to the very beginning of Earth's long history. The planet's atmosphere was created shortly after the Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago. The early Earth was highly volcanic. And for millions of years, these volcanoes spewed out huge quantities of gas. Slowly, these gases built up and created an atmosphere. But it was nothing like the atmosphere we know today. This was a witch's brew of carbon dioxide, methane and steam, laced with poisonous hydrogen sulfide. There was no sign of the gas we humans depend upon, oxygen. This lethal mix was to endure for something like 2 billion years. Until something unexpected began to transform the atmosphere. Primitive life.
Okay, that was from a video called The Power of the Planet, which is a series made by the BBC, which I think is available online, and that was the episode which is called Atmosphere. Now, the whole program is quite interesting and has quite a lot of information in, but it is an hour long. But if you want some extra information and you want to sort of find out more about that, then as I said, it's quite an interesting video. I just realised I've written all over my slide, apologies. So let's have a little bit more information about this then. So looking at the development of the Earth's atmosphere in a bit more detail. I'm going to go through almost in a bit like a timeline. So if you want to add the times, the dates, the how long ago it was to the little card sort or worksheet we've just done, then feel free. Check what you've done with the worksheet as we go through this, and then I will be giving you the answers for the worksheet afterwards. So we start off 4.5 billion years ago. Now this is around about the time that the Earth formed, and if you look at the picture here, we can see that the Earth was just a molten ball of rock. Now magma is what we call molten rock, and this molten rock and minerals, it was just a fiery ball of molten rock. That's all it was. And gradually over sort of 1 billion years, 1 billion years is a very long period of time, but over 1 billion years, the Earth's surface cooled and the crust started to form, and it was no longer molten on the outside, it was a very thin layer of solid rock. But it was covered in volcanoes. The molten rock from underneath was bursting through that crust. And those volcanoes released carbon dioxide, water vapour, methane and ammonia, 4 really important gases that you need to be aware of. Now, most of the atmosphere early on was carbon dioxide, very similar to how Mars is mostly carbon dioxide in its atmosphere today. So here we have a picture of some volcanoes. Now, obviously we can't go back in time billions of years or any time at all to take pictures of volcanoes at the beginning of the Earth's sort of lifespan, but we can, as scientists, use the evidence from volcanoes today to make theories about what volcanoes were like and what gases were coming out of those volcanoes back when the Earth did form. So the Earth continued to cool, and the water vapour that was coming out of those volcanoes continued to be produced, but also cooled as well, and that caused it to condense. Now, condensing means turns from liquid to gas. Sorry, from gas to liquid. Oh dear, got no hope if I can't get it right. Gas to liquid. Apologies for poor handwriting here. So turns from gas to liquid, that's condensing, and we got rain forming, and that formed the oceans. So oceans started to form. Now the oceans are salty because the volcanic eruptions continued in the sea underneath the ocean, and we still get that today. You can get volcanoes underneath the sea, and rocks dissolved into the oceans. Now anybody who's into space might recognise the object in this picture. This is a comet, and they are balls of rock and ice, and the tail is mostly ice crystals. You might be thinking, why am I showing you pictures of comets if we're talking about the Earth's atmosphere? Well, comets fell to Earth from space, which added extra water to the oceans. So not just the water coming out of the volcanoes, but water coming out from the oceans as well. So moving on, what's happening now? Well, if we look at this picture again, this is a picture from nowadays. What's in this picture? Well, that green stuff that looks pretty gross is actually massively important to us. And it's algae. And algae is the oldest form of life, the oldest form of plant life. And they're extremely simple plants. They're like slime, but they're still plants. And algae evolved from microorganisms. Now, we're not 100% sure where those microorganisms came from. Some people think that they arrived on asteroids and bits of rock from elsewhere in the universe, but there are various theories as to where life came from. We will never know. Now, algae, because they're plants, use carbon dioxide to photosynthesize, producing oxygen. And once this started happening and we got plants photosynthesizing and oxygen being produced, this is what changed everything on Earth. This is why we exist, because of the fact that algae originated. And once we got simple plants, it was only a matter of time before we got more complicated plants. Now, you can't see particularly easily in this picture, but this is an ancient woodland, and you can actually see there are ferns in here. And if you look up about ferns, ferns are a very, very old type of plant. Not as simple as algae, obviously, because they're not slime, they do have leaves, but ferns are very, very simple plant life, and they evolved very early on. So we've got these more complicated plants forming, which continued to photosynthesize, reducing the CO2 and increasing the oxygen. And so the more plants we got, the more the CO2 reduced and the more the O2 increased. And once there was a sufficient amount of oxygen in the atmosphere, it was only a matter of time before animals evolved, because there was increased oxygen. Now, this is still billions of years ago. This is still a very long time that we're talking about. And if we were to look at a clock, I'm going to show you a picture in just a second, we can see that in the lifespan of the Earth, the amount of time that went past is very, very short for this to happen. So looking a bit more about what happened to the CO2, is we've got here, once life appeared, we've got shells. Now obviously shells had living creatures in them. So this is now sort of far into past dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff. And we're looking here at what is happening. So I've got shells and I've got the White Cliffs of Dover on the south coast of the UK. Why am I showing you this picture? Well, carbon dioxide that was in the atmosphere, as well as being used by plants, also got trapped in seashells and in sedimentary rocks, such as chalk. If you were to look at a sample of chalk from one of those cliffs that we can just see in this picture, you'll be able to see that there's tiny bits of crushed up shell and that kind of stuff. And it's the living creatures that trap the CO2 in its shells. So we can consider sedimentary rocks as being a store of carbon dioxide, something we're going to look at next lesson. So here is that little worksheet that we were looking at. And let's have a look at the order that it should go in. So number 1 is the Earth formed as a molten ball of rock and minerals. So make sure that you've got that one ticked off. If you've not quite got the rest in order, have a quick look and see if you can order them now. The second is that the Earth's surface was covered in volcanoes, releasing carbon dioxide, water vapour, methane and nitrogen. The water vapour condensed as the Earth cooled and rain fell. This formed the first oceans. Comets also brought water, adding to what was in the oceans. Then we get bacteria appearing. Now, I didn't mention that in my little walkthrough just now, but hopefully you might work out that bacteria are far more simple than plants. So it was bacteria before algae. So algae evolved from bacteria. They made their own food using carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, producing oxygen as a waste product. Number 7 is oxygen levels rose steadily as algae evolved into more complicated plants, and that is a picture of a fern that you can see there. Number 8, plants continued to use the carbon dioxide. It was also locked in shells, the oceans and sedimentary rocks. Now, I didn't mention this again, but oceans also do absorb CO2. We call it a carbon dioxide sink. So big oceans can absorb carbon dioxide. Number 9, animals evolved using the oxygen from algae to respire. Now remember, respiration is a chemical reaction. It's not the action of breathing, it's the action of using oxygen to release energy. And then that leaves us finally with the little pie chart at the bottom, our atmosphere today, which gives us the percentages. So what I was saying about everything taking a very long time can be explained using this clock. And we're going to think about the lifespan of the Earth from when it formed to now, and we're going to think about what if that was 1 hour? What if only 1 hour has passed since the Earth formed? Well, we can see here that the Earth's crust formed at 1 minute into the hour, so 59 minutes ago. That's when the Earth formed. And if we look at what happens and how long it takes before we get cells with nucleus, it's only 20 minutes ago that we found cells with a nucleus. And the bacteria, really simple bacteria, didn't appear until 17 minutes into the Earth's life. Now, where did man appear? Well, if we look at that, modern man didn't appear until like 1/100th of a second ago. And if we look at when the dinosaurs were, the first dinosaur appeared 3 minutes ago. And the last dinosaur disappeared less than 1 minute ago. Now that might give you some kind of an idea of the vastness of time that we're talking about, because when we think about dinosaurs, that's prehistoric. But in the lifespan of the Earth, it's 1/60th. Okay, 1 minute ago, if the Earth has been in existence for 1 hour. So we are talking about vast periods of time, and it took massive amounts of time for these changes to the atmosphere to take place. Now we're going to be looking at various bits of this later on in the topic in more detail. But if you've got any questions about what we've talked about in this video, then please do send me a message and let me know.